Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about the Dwarves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The Dwarf rework has certainly shifted the dynamic around in Dwarven campaigns by quite a bit. The things that you cared about previously are things that may no longer matter. Or if they do matter, and they generally do still matter to a degree or another, they are far less important. It is a wonderful rework and the Dwarves are certainly a far more powerful race, but the dynamic between the campaigns has certainly shifted. There are some legendary lords worth playing more than others. So starting with the currently quote-unquote worst Dwarven campaign to play right now, it would be Phorek Ironbrow. Now, the reason behind Phorek being at the very bottom of this list is that his campaign just doesn't match necessarily what you care about when you are playing a Dwarf campaign in general. See, the problem is, every single Dwarf campaign has some legendary grudge associated with it, like a natural grudge that you're going to do. And for Phorek, this grudge, the Carrickzorn Scorn, is genuinely the worst grudge to actually do. It's also the least rewarding grudge, only giving you Oath Gold. So you could say you ignore it, but the way Dwarven campaigns work with Age of Reckoning is that those kind of grudges can really help you out with respect to settled grudges by giving you a significant advantage. So that is one of the problems here. For instance, if you're playing a Belegar campaign, you can fairly easily wipe out the Oak of Ages and deal with both Orion and Durfu, and do so in a natural way, and get a bunch of grudges on top of the grudge reward that you're going to get there. If you're playing Thorgrim, wiping out Skarsnik and Queek is a fairly natural path. Now, obviously, if you're playing as Phorek, you can wipe out Queek reasonably quickly, but you're kind of reliant, you are very much reliant on RG to do it. Furthermore, while Phorek certainly has a good amount of power, because of the territory he has, it's actually quite tricky, the trickiest, to fill up your initial Age of Reckoning. It essentially requires you to go to war with Manfred, wipe him out, and get the grudges through that. And even then, you may not necessarily be able to quite so easily. You're going to rely a bit on RNG. The problem is, your natural expansion in a Phorek campaign is to go north, take Karagorun, take Lamiat, get the artifacts over there. And then, you know, later on deal with Krakar. Though, interestingly enough, you don't have a grudge against Tic-Tac-Toe. So one of the things you can do is actually ally Tic-Tac-Toe and have a joint war against Krakar. Yeah, lizardmen fighting each other is a bit silly. And you also don't get grudges against the lizardmen. You get them against Skaven, but the problem is, even the Skaven that are over here in the Kingdom of Beasts are not going to give you a lot of grudges initially. So, without dealing with Manfred, you can't fill up your first Age of Reckoning, which is a problem. On top of that, one of the main rewards, if you will, in a Phorek campaign is the ability of Confederating Karak-Azul. But the problem with Confederating Karak-Azul is when you confederate them, let's say you confederate them just before turn 10, well, then you're going to end up in the situation where your second Age of Reckoning is going to require a significant number of grudges because your Age of Reckoning grudges are based on the number of grudges you can see. So if you confederate Karak-Azul just before turn 10, literally on turn 10, then you will end up in a situation where on turn 11, on your second Age of Reckoning, you will end up with a ridiculous number of grudges for that age, which may not be manageable. Furthermore, because you want to deal with Manfred, because you want to deal with Krakar, because you want to deal with Teclis and Khalida, while technically you could just ignore the first Age of Reckoning and go deal with Queek, you're going to hurt yourself in one way or another. And on top of that, there is currently a bug, or I'm not sure if it's intended, but there is currently an issue with Confederation. See, Dwarves now have distinct confederations with the other Dwarf Legendary Lords. That's all well and good, gives you a huge level of power. But the problem with all of this is that every faction, be a minor or major faction, does vastly increase the number of total settled grudges that you need in order to get the Confederation. So it doubles from 15 to 30,000 grudges if you confederate either a major or minor faction. Now, this is a problem in other Dwarf campaigns, being Thorgrim and Belegar, to be certain, because of Barak-Var, Zufbar, Karak-Hurn, etc. But for Phorek, this is especially a problem because it is just your natural expansion path, whereas if you're playing Belegar, you could just decide not to confederate Karak-Hurn, though it's still an issue in his campaign, to be absolutely clear on that. But it's not quite as important. So you get screwed either way with respect to this. Either you ignore Carrick Azul and don't confederate them, which just doesn't feel all that great, or you do confederate them and you get screwed over here. Finally, and a critical point, is the climate situation. See, dwarves, for all their power that they do have because of the rework, still care about having pleasant climate. Dealing with Manfred is bad enough, but something you can manage. Besides, he has some really powerful landmarks over here, so it is kind of worth it to at least take his initial province. But the problem is frozen. Having frozen on pleasant screws you over in so many significant ways because there's a lot of grudges and a lot of potential with Grombrindal in Nagrod. So now having frozen climate is a limiting factor in every single Dwarven campaign. And Phoric doesn't have frozen climate. So when you do confederate Grombrindal, when you confederate Malachi, you are going to end up in a worse position than you were in, than you would be in other campaigns. It just means the territory is not quite as good. It means expansion is not quite as good. To be fair, if you do play with the mod that removes climate penalties, it's not nowhere near as bad. So that's what I would recommend if you're playing a Phoric campaign. But I do rate these things based on how they are in vanilla. So I'm sure some mods are going to come along and really help this campaign. While there are certainly some significant benefits through the Ancient Vault, I just feel like Phoric kind of got the short end of the stick with this particular situation. It would be better if Lamia and Khalida gave you more grudges. That would actually help solve quite a few issues, but as long as we have, but then you'd still have the Confederation problem. Hopefully that will be fixed, because minor factions should not add to the required grudges for Legendary Lords. Legendary Lords should add to the requirements of grudges. So that is a problem, limiting factor. And it's actually a bigger issue than you might imagine, because if you don't confederate Grombrindal, for instance, pretty quickly, then he may not have any kind of territory. So you end up losing a lot more than you might think if you, say, do the natural thing, confederate Caracazul once you get 6 territories after turn, as turn 2 begins. Because you'll get that objective after turn 1. So those are all the problems in Phoric's campaign. And for my part, I just think, like, yeah, every other Dwarven campaign is better than his to play. At the same time, you could argue you have the benefit of Savannah and Jungle, so you could go over here in Lustria, but I'm going to say it bluntly, I don't think Lustria is one of the best areas of the game. In fact, I think it's one of the worst. Though Dwarfs have a better situation with that because they can at least use the Underway to get through it. The jungle slows you down significantly. And number 5, it is Belegar Ironhammer, the first DLC Lord in the entire game minus the Warriors of Chaos, which were a pre-order bonus regardless. Belegar and Skarsnik. I think both Belegar and Skarsnik are legendary lords that are actually not worth playing. For all the power the Greenskins have, for all the power the Dwarves have right now, I wouldn't recommend either of their campaigns. And there's actually many reasons for Belegar, as opposed to, say, Skarsnik. See, one of the things to mention about Belegar that actually goes against him is that of all AI-controlled factions of the Dwarves, he is genuinely the single most durable faction. Also, interestingly enough, Phoric is a fairly durable faction under AI control, so that's actually less incentive to play them, because if you know a faction is going to survive for certain, then there's less incentive to play them because you can always rely on them staying alive, so you can confederate them. Like Thorgrim can get wiped out, Ungrim can be wiped out, for instance, Malachi can be wiped out. So those are considerations to make when it comes to, like, do I want to play this campaign or do I want to confederate it, especially because you have certainty of confederation. On top of that, it is really annoying playing a campaign where you have plus 50% upkeep until Carrick Peaks is conquered. While the Dwarves have a much better economic situation and just a better situation overall, that is going to be a hugely limiting factor in what you can do. Now, to be sure, you can wipe out all the major threats around it, be it Ikekla, Mogr, the Wood Elves. You can really benefit in this campaign from going to war with Alpha Lorem. So that does work, but the faction effects, when we're looking at them, they're just not really great. Oh, Vanguard deployment during underway battles. If it was field battles, it wouldn't matter. During underway battles, means absolutely nothing. Oh, leadership when laying siege. Okay, when was the last time any reasonable player lost a siege battle because their leadership broke? To be blunt about it, sieges are such battles that you have complete control over how much you want to risk in them. That's not even funny. Again, if it was field battles or even underway battles, that would be a better situation, but no. Effectively, Belegar doesn't have faction effects or any worthwhile faction effects until you get Carrick Peaks. Now, the benefits you do get when you get Carrick Peaks, be it experience, Lord Recruit, rank control, etc., Those are very strong, but you're going to be spending a good portion of this campaign, 20-30 turns, dealing with that miserable upkeep situation, and also doing things that aren't necessarily going to be conducive towards filling up your initial Age of Reckoning. Though, to be clear, unlike Forik, who has to really deal with things that are unpleasant, like dealing with Manfred because everyone is too distant, at least Belegar does have a genuine, real possibility of getting his first, second, third Age of Reckoning. He does have a problem in a similar way to Forik, in the sense that one of your objectives is to be able to confederate Karakern. But let me be blunt and saying this, Karakern is nowhere near the same level of value as something like Karak Azul, because Karak Azul starts with 5 regions, and you might reasonably be able to get all of them, or 4 of them, 3-4 of them, by the time confederate. Getting just 2 regions and an army which has Thunderers and Grudge Throwers is not really worth it. It was worth it before because, yeah, a unit of Thunderer, an extra unit of artillery mattered. That's until they added the Grudge Seller units, which give you Grudge Throwers, Iron Drakes, all that. And now Thunderers and Iron Drakes can also be recruited in any Tier 2 settlement. So in a sense, the Dwarf rework gave you less reason to care about Karakern. So you don't have to confederate them, but it is something worth mentioning. And finally, like with Forik, he can't get frozen. So that is another limiting factor that comes in Belegar's campaign. Having to play a campaign for a pretty decent length of time, like 20, 30 turns, like you could rush for Karak Apex, but you'd screw yourself over in such a major way it's not even funny. But having to play a campaign where you either screw yourself over or you play a significant portion of that campaign with a major upkeep penalty is not really a fun experience. I feel they should do this a different way. Like, if there's any Dwarven campaign I feel should have gotten some faction effect reworks, it would be Belegar. Now, to be clear, Belegar is absolutely worth confederating, not necessarily as a priority, but his global recruitment capacity and duration benefits, his local recruitment capacity, his construction benefits are enormously significant, but you can rely on him staying alive when you're not playing him. Very rarely have I ever seen Belegar getting wiped out, and it usually involves a combination of Aranessa, Ikeclaw, and Warzak to do so. Guy's durable, what can I say? So that's less incentive. And it's also this misery of having to deal with the threats over here, though you can do so, but also being worried that, oh, am I going to be able to reach Forgrim in time before he's wiped out by Skarsnik, which can still happen in this patch. So those are some of the issues in this campaign, let alone the distance between you and Ungrim, who can be wiped out by Azag or even Zufbar, though you wouldn't want to confederate with Zufbar for a fairly long time, but just some considerations to have when you're playing this campaign. So powerful Legendary Lord to confederate, very reliable to confederate, but also just those kind of issues that do come up with regards to Belegar. So my perspective with Belegar pre-patch was that it was worth it far more to confederate them rather than play him. That hasn't changed. Maybe it will change at one point in time, but it is a better situation than Forik, where quite a few things blow up in his face. Whereas you, at least with Belegar, you have natural legendary grudges that are worth doing, like, yeah, taking over the entirety of Avalorn and making it into your lumber camp, if you will. That's fairly significant. But one thing I would like to note about legendary lords, in my perspective, the best legendary lords in the game, and when I say best, I'm not talking just the strongest, but the best legendary lords to play, the ones that have the best campaigns, the most fun, the most interesting, are not necessarily ones where you get screwed over for a long time, but if you play a long campaign or a longer campaign, they get better. No, they're the ones that start in a good position and get better as you play them. That is not how Belegar's campaign is. And number 4, it would be the good old reliable Forgrim Grudgebearer, the one you would consider the generic legendary lord of the dwarves, because that's exactly the role that Forgrim has always filled. So middle of the pack, nothing quite exceptional, but nothing quite as broken as, say, Forik or Belegar. Like, there's a lot of downsides in those campaigns. There's not quite as many downsides in Forgrim's campaign. His first Age of Reckoning is perfectly fine, though you might have to cheese Skarsnik a bit unless you want to get screwed on your second one. But it is certainly a fairly powerful campaign that does give you a lot of power. You get better commandments, so your growth, for instance, from Empowered Guilds is better than any other dwarf. So that just means you're getting settlements built up faster. you're getting higher tiers, you're getting more unit recruitment. That is a fairly substantial benefit. His Lord skill line, giving you the ability, giving you extra growth and control, as well as hero capacity for 3 of the 4 dwarf heroes, with the exception of Slayers, is also in itself fairly significant. And also, the right to wrongs is so absurd. Like, perfect vigor and unbreakable in fighting against enemies with 1,000+ grudges, which you will certainly encounter in the Dwarven campaign, is quite very absurd as well. I mean, maybe there's not a lot of them, though. Yeah, you can see over here, Emmerich. So, just having a completely unbreakable normal dwarf army for Frogrim is incredibly powerful. Of course, you can confederate him and get his skill line regardless, and you can get all these quest items, though one of the benefits with having a lot of quests is that you end up in the position where you can really time these quests to benefit you in a particular Age of Reckoning where you might struggle. So actually having a lot of quest items is very beneficial. If there's any particular downside with Forgrim as opposed to the ones that are higher on this list, it's 2 things. One, he just doesn't feel all that special. Like, yes, growing settlements faster is an incredible benefit, but you're not necessarily going to be struggling with surplus points like once you get the Grand Frontage Chamber, so that growth kind of ends up being redundant after a particular point in time, and so do the other commandments. Certainly a good early game benefit. His diplomatic benefit with dwarves is meaningless because you don't necessarily want to confederate other dwarf factions until basically kind of at this point of a campaign. That's kind of where you want to get Zufbar. And just don't confederate Barakvar for a very long time. Believe me, like, it's just not worth confederating or allying Barakvar because of the grudge situation, and in terms of both requirements for Legendary Lords and in terms of Age of Reckoning, so that's not worth it. Recruit rank for Hammers just doesn't feel all that special. Forgrim does have the benefit of playing a campaign as him, in the sense that he's actually the squishiest of the dwarf factions when under the control of the AI, because he's under a lot of pressure. Scrag, Skarsnik, Tretch, potentially, Queek for certain. So that is putting a lot of pressure, and his AI may not cope with him. So the benefit of playing him is avoiding that situation. But like with Forik and like with Belegar, you don't have Frozen, so that does limit your campaign, in particular in the Norska situation, the Kislev situation, and the Nagrand situation. So those are some limiting factions. Certainly a much better campaign versus Forik and Belegar to actually play. Can be fairly enjoyable. You don't feel the same level of frustration as you do in those other campaigns, but absolutely, certainly some issues. Well, not issues, more limiting factors, I would dare say, in this campaign versus the others. But absolutely workable campaign. It's not miserable, it works well, it's just not quite as special as some of the others. In 3rd position, we have Ungrim, Iron Fist of Karakadrin, the Slayer King, who really was playing more like a generic Legendary Lord rather than a Slayer King previously, before 5.0 came out. But now, Ungrim is actually an exceptional campaign in a lot of ways. Let's consider his starting situation. Because of where he starts over here, next to this layer, taking control of 2 provinces very quickly is very easily. Now, these are not great provinces, to be certain. It would be nice if these 2 regions were merged together into a single province. That would actually make him even more powerful. But it is very, very hard to fail in Ungrim's campaign on your first Age of Reckoning. In fact, he may have one of the easiest ways of getting that first Age of Reckoning done without relying on any cheese or even really thinking too much about it. Oh, just take Grand Peak, then go beat up Skarsnik. That's it. And after that, you got to decide, do I deal with Tretch and leave a defensive army over here in the World Edge Archway and go deal with Azak? Or do I go after Tretch and try and play defensively over here against Azak? That is the choice. But you're certainly going to get your first 2 Ages of Reckoning, if not your 3rd Age of Reckoning, and your 4th Age of Reckoning done fairly easily. If you're failing an Age of Reckoning in Ungrim's campaign, typically the 3rd, I would say, would be the trouble spot. It's because you either got too much vision with too many factions, or because you also chose to go for certain things that are maybe not so great in terms of an Age of Reckoning. Like, for instance, over here in this campaign, I went after Draika. Wasn't the best choice, but, you know, eliminating Draika is always worthwhile in respect of money and other benefits. So there are trade-offs in there are some trade-offs to be made, but it's certainly a powerful campaign. Furthermore, Ungrim benefits immensely from the DLC itself, because the Slayer Shrine in Caracadrin, which I've removed here because you don't want to get it back, and like you want to use it initially, then get rid of it, get it back when you get Caracadrin to tier 4, which is going to take a while, because you want other recruitment heroes and all that. But you start with the ability of getting a Dragon Slayer. Then you have the easiest path of getting Garagrim Iron Fist, the new legendary hero for the dwarves with the DLC. So you have 2 heroes with replenishment. That is a significant benefit in this campaign, because it means you have a lot more strategic flexibility than other Dwarven campaigns. And on top of that, you really make use of Slayers. You can recruit them the fastest in a campaign of all the Dwarf Lords. You get the most of them. And while you may not want to make entire Slayer armies, though that's perfectly viable if you want to do so, because of the increased replenishment, while you still may not want to use full Slayer armies, I think you should get some faction effects that do give you far more reasons to use Slayers than they are right now. But while you may not want to go down that path, at least Slayers work far better. The new Demon Slayer really helps with this. Like, this is a campaign that goes high up there if you own the DLC. So the new Demon Slayers help with that. The Dragon Slayers help with that. Just the skill line changes for Ungrim himself. The changes to Slayers. Slayers are more powerful. Ungrim is more powerful with Slayers. Journey's End is finally fixed. Pretty certain about that. And we get other benefits as well. Furthermore, like with Forgrim, he does have a good amount of quest items. Not quite as many, but he still has 3 of them that are accessible fairly early on in the campaign. That does help with an Age of Reckoning. And on top of that, you also have Frozen Climate. So that is a pretty damn big deal in this campaign, because it means Malachi and Grombrindle are not going to create the same problems in this campaign. Will be incredibly beneficial to Confederate. There's always the risk of Grombrindle being wiped out. That's why he hasn't been on this list so far. One of the reasons, at any rate. But suffice to say, if you can Confederate Grombrindle and he beats up Malekith, you end up in an exceptional position in your campaign, being able to dominate the campaign map for a very, very long time. So Ungrim, really powerful, much more fun to use. Starts with Slayers, uses Slayers. And look, just the ability of getting units faster, like Iron Drakes, Thunderers, heroes at tier 2 really benefits in this campaign, because even though growth has been buffed, he still has these regions which aren't particularly great for that, but you have a lot more tools in the box in an Ungrim campaign than you did before. So it goes from being genuinely the worst Dwarven campaign to play and one of the worst campaigns to play in the entire game to being one of the best campaigns to actually play in the game. And certainly one of the best campaigns to play out of the ones that have been affected in a major way by 5.0 and Thrones of Decay. And number 2 is Grombrindle, the White Dwarf. Genuinely the best dwarf campaign pre-rework, and right now, post-rework, well, let me just show you this campaign map. No, first off, let me show you my economy. Turn 64, 136,000. It's not the highest income you can get in a campaign by this point, but it's certainly one of the best incomes you can get in a campaign by this particular stage. Grombrindle is crazy powerful in every single way, and he's awesome to play. He's got a fun campaign even when he has difficult foes, because for instance, Conquer Wolfwand for a grudge in Volzamvol to settle the War of Vengeance is not quite worth it, but it certainly is fun to test yourself against the High Elven trio of Tarion, Alariel, and Elfarion. I literally allied Nakari in this campaign just to sell the territory of Wolfwand to someone, though I obviously would have liked to have gotten Nagaryth, but just felt it wasn't worth it. But yes, I conquered all of Wolfwand, all of Nagorond, with the exception of Katep, who's just like holding these because it's not quite as worth it. Conquer all of this, literally like the Valkia and Slaanesh, because Grombrindle hates the elves that much. It probably would have saved me a lot of hassle if I did ultimately destroy Valkia. I admit there would have been some benefits, and then allied Hellebron for a while, or at least had the Iron Aggression Pact. Though keep in mind there are going to be legendary grudges in this particular campaign against Hellebron. So bear that in mind, that any alliance with the elves is a temporary one at best, because we're here to kill elves. So all of Wolfwand, all of Nagorond, and I just look at this. Okay, let me be frank about this. This will not happen in the vast majority of campaigns. And let me explain why this is. The reason I was able to take all of the freaking Ballands, Skaven Blight, Tylea and the Border Princes, as well as, well, this, is because in this campaign, I got good RNG and both Ungrim and Forgrim did well. Or Ungrim, Forgrim, Belgar did quite well. That will not happen in like 90% of the campaigns, but just the insanity of being able to do it is crazy powerful in itself. So that's insane. Like the climate situation, you have frozen, you have wasteland, you have mountain, you have savanna. I'm not sure about the savanna thing. Like maybe Creative Assembly could explain that, because it just feels weird to have savanna. I mean, there's not a lot of regions with savanna, I gotta tell you, in a campaign. Just gonna point out, I mean, yeah, you could take some of Hexoatl's territory, but certainly not the jungle territories. Yeah, just a bizarre choice, I gotta admit. Like, there's no region of the campaign that has predominant savanna. Maybe it helps with Cafe. Yeah, it does help with some portions of Cafe, but not really a whole lot. So maybe CA would like to explain that at one particular point. Okay. Beyond that, the insanity of what I've been able to achieve in this campaign, you have a very reasonable path towards your first stages of Reckoning, which is just beat the crap out of Malekith and then beat the crap out of Valkia and Hellebrand, no problemo. And then beat the crap out of the High Elves, no problem whatsoever. Get Confederations, no issues. Bully Be'lakor as well, and then conquer all of freaking Norsca. It's great that they changed Valkia's starting territory from Frozen to Chaos Wasteland. That's one of the benefits. So they didn't change Norsca from Chaos Wasteland to Frozen and Mountain. They changed all of this from all of the northern part here from Chaos Wasteland to Frozen, which actually does benefit Grombrindle by quite a bit. Like, basically, Chaos Wastelands start over here in the Fortress of the Damned. Until that point, you've got territory that's really suitable in your campaign, and you're surrounded by enemies that will give you a lot of grudges. The Ogres over here, Katep even may give you a decent number of grudges, weirdly enough, unlike, say, Cetra or Khalida, though it's not really worth fighting Katep. Like, Katep is a pretty passive action. Beat up the Sisters of Twilight. So you work up against a lot of Legendary Lords. It's a really fun starting position. And then we gotta talk about Grombrindle. Like, Grombrindle is almost always worth confederating the first for two reasons. One, he and Forgrim are the two most vulnerable lords. So, like I said, Forgrim is the squishiest of them all, but that's because Forgrim can die pretty easily if things go against him. Grombrindle, it's like certain that he will die, right? With Forgrim, things can go either way. With Grombrindle, 90% of campaigns when you're not playing him, Malekith will wipe him out. Dark Elves are just stronger and auto-resolved than Dwarves when we're talking AI versus AI for whatever reason. He does have a lot of quest battles which benefit him immensely, and then he has an absurd, powerful benefit with the Ancestors. So you can get Living Ancestor event that gives you either an army benefit in terms of combat power, Grombrindle benefit in terms of his own personal combat power, or a lot of control and replenishment, or a significant amount of upkeep, construction costs, or recruitment costs, and research rates. So this means, especially because student and archivist rates have been nerfed by quite a bit, this means that Grombrindle can build up things faster. He'll have more money than other Dwarven campaigns. He has a really good climate situation in his campaign. He'll get a lot of grudges settled through just beating the crap out of the factions he would have beaten up anyway. And because he has those 4 quest battles that also give him vision with distant factions that may not have a lot of grudges, that means that you will have a lot of settled grudges, you'll have a lot of money. You may be the richest Legendary Lord of the Dwarves just because those quest battles give like 7 to 10k each, if not more, for doing them. So that's very, very significant. Absolutely worth confederating, though, like the first one. And the reason he's worth confederating is like Grombrindle doesn't have so much of a faction effect as he has a blue skill line. He has 15% campaign movement range for all your armies. It says all characters, but it affects all your armies, including Grombrindle himself. On top of that, recruit rank, recruitment cost, 6% casualty replenishment. So you don't even need Slayers in a Grombrindle campaign, or once you get Grombrindle, because you get 5% from the rat poison. You get 6% from his blue skill line, so 11%, and then Rune Lords and Lords have 5% as well. It's a choice of Rune Lords, but it's the one you almost always want to get. So you end up you end up in a ridiculously powerful position in terms of casualty replenishment, like 16%, 17% casualty replenishment for every single one of your armies led by lords and rune lords. Faction-wide, and armies that move much faster on the campaign map. Global recruitment capacity. Belegar has a better recruitment benefit with the global recruitment duration, but you can get Belegar pretty quickly. In fact, he might be the first one you want to get. Then on top of that, this insane dwarf, insane, I'm serious, gets an additional 15% campaign movement range. He's not Tarax or Valkia or Skarbrand, but he's certainly competing with them. And remember, with Valkia and Skarbrand, or even Tarax, it's they personally that have a lot of campaign movement range. The other armies they have are not necessarily that fast. Grombrindal's armies overall are very fast. He gets plus 30% campaign movement range, and that's before you take into consideration, because you can recruit engineers much faster, you get an additional campaign movement range. You can get to the campaign movement range cap on Grombrindal's own army, and being able to move 50% faster on the campaign map is a biblical level of power with him. And just starting with him, like, yes, always Confederate Grombrindal, because the sheer level of power he's going to give you, even if he's been completely wiped out, is so insane. It's unmatched by any of the Dwarf Legendary Lords in terms of Confederation benefits. This includes Malachi. Like, it's worth Confederating Grombrindal over everyone else just because of that movement range, let alone casualty replenishment and recruitment benefits. Guy is crazy. He's a really good fighter in combat. Like, Malachi might kill a lot of things from range, but in melee, Grombrindal is actually the best melee lord of the dwarves. Yes, this might surprise you. The guy hits like a truck in a battle. He has a lot of vigor loss reduction for his armies. Yeah, Grombrindal was already pretty crazy. He was the one dwarf campaign I actually enjoyed playing a reasonable amount pre-patch, because he had a lot of things that helped make the dwarf up for the shortcomings the dwarves had. He still has that skill line, but the dwarves are now an S tier faction. You put one and one together, you understand the biblical level of power that this guy has unlocked. Incredible Legendary Lord, always been a great campaign, always has been really fun to play, but now he's really one of the best in the entire game, and it's crazy. He gets number 2 because, well, what Malachi has to offer is a bit crazier than that in some respects, but yeah, if I don't own Thrones of Decay, there's nothing wrong with just enjoying a Grombrindal campaign. This campaign I played before I could actually play the DLC, because CA didn't give us the patch and the DLC at the same time, and it was something. Like, it's something to play a campaign and have 17 armies by 64. I don't think I could get that level of armies as the Greenskins, and I certainly would not get armies on the same level of Quarrelers in a Greenskin campaign. Now, granted, I still have a bunch of stuff, but there's also like things like Iron Breakers. Yeah, this campaign is really the gift that kept on giving the moment I started. Insane level of power, insane level of achievement here. Genuinely one of the best campaigns I played. Most of the campaigns you're going to fight at him as him would not achieve this necessarily, but damn, it's incredible. And finally, at number 1 is Malachi Makaisen. For what is worth from a campaign standpoint, I think Grombrindal is actually stronger than Malachi, and I'm not saying that lightly. Malachi just has very fun armies to use, because he gets cannons, organ guns fairly early on in his campaign. That's a level of awesome that other campaigns can't match. So he's kind of like the Oxyotl in terms of the unique units. Like, I've said it before and I'll say it again, CA did take stuff from other DLC's Great Lords and implemented it in this one, like Elspeth gets Oxyotl's Sanctums. Well, Malachi gets Oxyotl's Blessed Units, because that's really how I would consider it, the adventure units. And then he makes them stronger. Far stronger. Stronger to a degree you don't even understand. Like, consider having 50% armor-piercing missile damage for Malachi, unit experience, reload time reduction, or cannons with grape shot. That is crazy powerful in itself. But it gets even better. What I really like about Malachi, beyond the fact that this campaign is really the adventures of Gotrek and Felix made into Total War at long last, which maybe we should have gotten a long time ago. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that this campaign is actually a lot more tricky than you might think, because you still have to worry about Grombrindal being potentially wiped out. You do have to worry about Ungrim and Forgrim and all that, but you can handle it. However, it is fun having a campaign like where your initial enemies are Frod, Trog, Azazel, and then you gotta deal with Wulfric, Archeon, Malice, Darkblade, Epidemius, and, well, I guess the rodent that we call Daniel. So in this campaign, things are certainly going in an interesting direction. I hope I'll be able to continue this campaign very soon after making this video, because the awesome factor of this campaign is really unparalleled. It is probably the single best campaign that Creative Assembly has ever made. And I've maintained this in many videos that I've made on the subject of rankings and all that the best campaigns aren't the ones where you have the highest level of power. Grombrindal has higher level of power than Malachi on a campaign level, and I've also maintained that it's what makes a campaign stronger is having better campaign mechanics or campaign power than army power. That's one of my issues with Elspeth. But the thing about Malachi, it's the design of the campaign, the design of his character. I mean, Gotrek and Felix personified in this campaign. I mean, you even have a Skaven quest battle where you basically deal with Tanquil. I mean, his name is not mentioned, but it really reeks of dealing with Tanquil. So all of this combines to make a really awesome experience. You have a good climate situation, you have a natural grudge expansion path, at least for your first Age of Reckoning. Second one and third one are a bit trickier, but it's certainly manageable, especially with this power. And you just have a lot more fun in this campaign. Like, let's say I start the Organ Gun adventure, well, things are gonna get interesting as we get a bunch of high-end demonic armies to deal with over here in the campaign. Over there in the Cast Wastelands. A campaign that pushes you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do, like going into the Cast Wastelands as dwarves and being exposed from the Cast Wastelands is in itself a fairly awesome experience. So yeah, great level of power. I think choosing Krakadrak as a starting location was a very inspired choice. Kislev benefits immensely from him being here, by the way. Like, you want to understand why Kislev is going to do much better in 5.0? Yeah, it's because Malachi is holding the fort against the forces of chaos to the north. As he should be, as is proper. The Mad Slayer Engineer is, well, just a great campaign, a great deal of fun with a lot of potential. And that would be all. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more, because there's a lot of things still to come.